Hello there. Okay, so this is one of my little lectures on, not on music, not on the stuff for the course really, but on learning. I had a couple of these earlier on, and then I got busy with stuff for the course, and I meant to do more of them. But just after taking this test, had a student email me and say, Dr. Curtin, I think I did terrible on the test, and I think it might be because of the way that I take notes. And do you have any tips for note taking? So I told him I would make this video and put it up so that everyone can benefit from it. And I think I'll probably continue doing some of this. And I don't want to overwhelm you with too many videos. So this sort of series, if I put a lecture like this that says on learning, it's going to be on some topic like this, and it's not necessary for the class, but it might help. Not just with this class, but with other classes, because I do have some pretty concrete ideas on how to learn effectively. I think any good teacher is thinking about this all the time, about learning as a very basic activity, and how we can do a better job of it. And also, you know, to have the kind of job I have as a college professor, you have to take an awful lot of tests, and they're often very, very difficult tests, and your entire college career might hinge on a single test. So, for example, when I took my doctoral qualifying exams, those are exams that are separate from the exams in your courses. So you could get straight A's in all your courses, but if you don't pass your qualifying exams, you're not getting your degree. And all of that time and money that you spent on that education, it's not going to result in a degree. So it's really important to pass those exams. And you have to have techniques of learning that get results, that don't just make you feel like you're learning. You're not just like going through the motions of learning or doing stuff that looks like learning, but actually getting material into your head so that you understand it. Okay, so maybe before I go further, I'm just going to reiterate what I said in the first lecture on learning, and that is my definition of learning. Everything is geared towards that, and that is that learning is understanding and remembering something that you didn't know before, right? The understanding is the critical part. If you can make yourself understand, the remembering is no big deal. But it doesn't work the other way. You cannot really make yourself remember something that you don't understand. Right? First of all, what would be the point of remembering it anyway if you don't really understand it? But it's the act of making something understood, giving it significance, right? Relating it, connecting it to things that you already know in your head, that makes you remember something. If you don't relate the stuff that you're trying to remember to something you already know, if you don't really attempt to understand it, you just try to memorize it. You say, I just can't wrap my head around this, but I'm just going to memorize it so I can pass the test. It's not going to work. You cannot remember that which you do not understand. You cannot remember something which literally has no significance to you, right? So you have to make the thing significant, right? All right, I don't want to get too far off topic because the question was about notes specifically. So I'm going to try and limit myself to notes. And first thing I would say about notes is you should keep in mind that the notes are a tool. They're a means to an end, right? They're not the be-all, end-all. They're not a thing to do for the sake of doing it. They're a tool. And I stress this because so often I will have students come to my office hours, and over and over again they say the same thing when they first come in. And actually I don't have students come to my office hours that often. But when they do, usually the first thing they say is, could you look at my notes? Tell me if my notes look good. And so I take their notes, and usually the notes look pretty good. Like the definitions are there just the way they were in the book, or just the way that I said them in class. And that's not surprising because the kind of student who will come for extra help is the kind of student who wants to do well, right? And will do the things that, they will put in at least that effort to make good notes. So that's all a good sign. And so, like, for example, the fact that this student just now emailed me and asked me for help with that, that's a very good sign because it shows that he's interested in wanting to do better, in wanting to learn. That's great. Okay, so thing is though, they show me their notes, they look good, and I say, yep, notes look good. Now, let me ask you some stuff out of these notes and see if you can answer without reading, without referring to your notes, right? And oftentimes they can't do it. So they've got the material in their notebook and they think that's kind of like good enough. But the notebook, remember, is just a means to an end, it's just a tool. Where the material has to go is in your head, right? So what you have to do is start a process fairly early on of getting the material from the notebook into your head. And again, I use one of my analogies. It's like, comparing to food. If I'm dishing out food and putting it on your plate, all right, the food on your plate, that's great, but it's just a means to an end. The plate is a tool. Where the food ultimately has to go is into your stomach. It doesn't do you any good on the plate. So same thing with material in the notebook. It's got to go into your head. All right? Now, one thing I would do, it's hard to know where to start exactly, but I'll just pick a place to start. Let's look at actually individual words and terms. Right? I find very often that the way that students will try and remember, without really understanding, because that's the way they've done it, I don't know what, try and remember some new word or term, especially if it's in a foreign language, is they will focus like a laser beam on the first letter. And, and I see this over and over again. So I'll ask a student, in preparation for a test coming up, I'll say something like, what do you call it what is the type of musical texture which consists of one line of melody and nothing else? And they'll say, oh yeah, I know this. It begins with an M. I say, yeah, actually it does begin with an M, but that's of no help at all. There are 10,000 words that begin with the letter M, right? This person's been focusing on the letter M. Now, the answer to that question actually is monophonic. And how are you going to remember monophonic? Well, first of all, you want to look at the whole word and try and focus on the meaning of the word. Try and relate parts of the word to words that you already know. So mono, like someone has a monopoly. They have sole control over something. The mono part means one. If you have a monocle instead of a pair of bifocals, then you've got, one of those Colonel Klink. Do you remember Colonel? Forget. Or a, there are lots of well, anyway, you get the idea. Mono means one, and phonic. Well, think of a phone, telephone, or a microphone. Phone has to do with speaking, actually. So if there is one speaking, and it really means one melody, but you get the idea, right? Monophonic means one line of melody, nothing else. So now that takes work to kind of take apart that word and connect it to stuff you already know. It takes work to be careful about spelling the word correctly and maybe even saying the word out loud, right? All of this takes work. But the work is part of the process. Again, it's sort of like, to use another analogy, physical exercise, right? We all know that getting in shape or staying in shape takes effort. It simply can't be done any other way. We all say no pain, no gain. And yet when it comes to learning, which is really just mental exercise, that's all it is, like developing your brain like a muscle or whatever. When it comes to mental exercise, we want it to be fun and easy. It makes learning fun. It makes learning easy. No. Now, learning can be fun if you're the kind of person who enjoys learning. I like learning, right? I mean, I guess at this stage of my life, I have the luxury of learning about things that I'm interested in, and that makes it more pleasant. Now, you guys might be in a position where you are kind of forced, not really forced, but you know what I mean. You have to learn about things that you might not be interested in, and that's good for you too. But the point is, you might be a person who enjoys learning for the sake of learning. And if so, that's great. It makes things much easier. You might not be the kind of person who just enjoys learning new things. And if that's true, you just have to say, well, tough. I don't enjoy it, but I have to do it because that's what I'm here at college for. Right? And it's going to take effort. You just have to accept that it takes effort and not look for any kind of easy way. I mean, there are probably easier ways. There are things that are more effective or whatever, but you should not look for learning to be either fun or easy. Right? The purpose of learning is not to have fun. Right? It's not to have an easy time. The purpose of learning is to actually learn something, either because you want to have some skill, or you want to get an A, or you want to get a degree, whatever the end result you desire. Fun is for fun. If you want fun, go to an amusement park, or I don't know what. Do whatever you think is fun. Okay. So learning takes work. The effort is part of the process, right? Just like in exercise. It's intrinsic to the process. It can't be taken away out of the process, right? So you should put in that extra effort to do things like spell words correctly, right? And say them out loud. Sometimes pronounce them correctly. If they're foreign words. Do you notice when I've been giving you these Italian terms, I go to the special effort of trying to pronounce them like an Italian would pronounce them. I say fortissimo. I don't say fortissimo. I don't say mezzo soprano. I say mezzo soprano, right? And I think that helps, actually. It might seem kind of silly, but pronouncing words correctly, especially foreign words, because this is what students do. Any unfamiliar word, but especially words that are in a foreign language, it's like a vampire. It's like, get that thing away from me. Or if I have to learn it, I'll just try and learn the first letter. No. Dive in, embrace that word, go to the extra effort to spell it correctly, try pronouncing it, because all of these are modes of learning. Now, I think that sometimes educators make too big a deal of different modes of learning and trying to cater to them. So, and the worst one of these, of course, is visual learner. We all learn it, well, I'm a visual learner. Yeah, we're all visual learners. If you're not blind, you're a visual learner, because so much of your brain is just a fact of your anatomy. Something like 80% of your cognitive brain is dealing with visual stimuli. We're just much more visual than, for example, we can't learn a lot through smell or whatever. Now, the problem with this class, with this whole visual learning thing is, music is not a visual art, right? It's understood through your ears, and it can be understood by reading about it. But other than, let's say, pictures of musical instruments, now that could help. It's not going to really help much in our future segments, because we've already dealt with that unit in the book. We're not going to be looking at instruments all that much more. A little bit, but not much more, individual instruments. The stuff that we have to learn is going to be learned basically two ways. And that is by listening to the music and by reading about the music. Pictures aren't going to help. Unless you are a very fluent reader of music, right, and you can look at actually printed sheet music and hear it playing in your head as you look at it, the visual stuff it's not going to help you in this class. You have to engage with a text. You have to extract meaning from words. Right? Okay, so another thing is, this is true of with regards to note-taking or just reading a book or listening to a lecture. Always be asking yourself, do I truly understand this? This sentence that I just read, or this thing that Dr. Curtin just said. I know I heard it. I know my eyes went over the words, but do I really understand it? Right? Always be asking yourself, after, let's say, every sentence, every paragraph, did I really understand that? Do I need to go back and read it again? Do I need to send Dr. Curtin an email asking him, what's the book talking about here? I don't quite understand that. Again, this is part of the process, and it takes effort. It's easier just to run your eyes over the page and not go through that, but it doesn't do any good. It's just a waste of time, right? Reading the book, like taking notes, is a means to an end. It's not something you do just for doing it. Like I assign some reading in the book. And you say, okay, I've read the book. That's great, but you're reading the book for a purpose, and that is to understand the material. And if you don't, at the end, if you don't understand the material, the reading was just a waste of time. Right? Okay, so getting back to more specifically to notes. Right? As you are making notes of stuff, make sure, like this thing that I'm writing down, do I really understand it? Or am I just writing down some words that Dr. Curtin said or that I had in the book? Okay, now, another thing about note-taking is that students sometimes approach note-taking as if it was stenography. I don't know if you're familiar with stenography, but if you ever watched like one of these courtroom dramas, there's always a stenographer in the courtroom. And the job of the stenographer is to record absolutely everything that's going on. Now, I guess maybe now they do tape recordings, but in the old days, at least, there's always someone sitting there at that stenography machine. All right? And the job of the stenographer is not to understand what's going on. The job of the stenographer is just to record it and get a written record so that later if they need to go back, say, oh no, this is what you said here, let the record show, all that stuff. Right? Your job is not to be a stenographer, to record absolutely everything that I say. You couldn't do that even if you tried, right? And you would be so busy trying to write down everything that you wouldn't be understanding anything. Your job is to sort of take the essence of what I say and to sort of distill it and put it in, and to condense it. And that means making decisions about what's important enough to write down? Can I get the gist of what Dr. Curtin is saying, let's say with 4 or 5 words, whereas he might go into more detail and talk in complete sentences and all that. Can I get the essence of what he's trying to tell me in 4 or 5 words at a time and then move on to the next one, right? Don't be so busy trying to write down every single word that I say that you don't process it. The processing is what makes you understand it. The mere act of writing in itself, it might help, but it doesn't necessarily generate understanding. I can copy down stuff that I don't understand, but the act of making decisions like this, of what to write down, what not to write down, how to rephrase something in a simpler way, right? How to organize it, all of that mental activity engaged with the material, whether it's coming from me or coming from the book, that's, again, part of the effort that makes stuff stick, right? That makes it significant, etc. So also, I would take notes from the book as well as from the lectures. In fact, here's what I would do in terms of how much note-taking should you do. Actually, there are some people who could probably get by without taking any notes at all. I took very little notes in college. I found that it distracted me from listening to the professor. And now, I don't know if this approach is going to work for everyone, but what I did is I just sat down in the front row and I looked up the professor and I just kind of took it in. I tried to experience the lecture. And I found that worked pretty well for me. It might not work well for everybody or for every class. So if you're going to take notes, probably a good idea to do that. And here's what I would do. Let's say you have a lecture and you're taking notes from the lecture. You're trying to take what I say and condense it to decide what's important, all that stuff I've talked about. You should also be making notes from the book. Here's how I would approach the reading. If I assign, let's say, 10 or 15 pages in the book, remember, it's not really that much reading because the book has a lot of pictures and listening guides. If I assign 10 pages of reading, it's really more like 5 pages. Okay, so what I would do first, I would just read it first and not even try to take notes. Just read it slowly and carefully and trying to really, check yourself. Am I really understanding, etc. Okay. And then let's say I assign that on a Monday. So on that Monday, you read these 10 or 15 assigned pages. Next day, you read them again. And this time you take notes from the book. You don't necessarily write down everything that the book says. What would be the point of that? We're not trying to copy out the book. What you do is look for words that are in bold print or italics, and maybe write the definitions of those words, for one thing. Also, these kind of textbooks, the way they are structured, it's very often something like this. You've got paragraphs, obviously, and very often the first or maybe the second sentence in a paragraph makes some statement of fact, like a definition of a term. New term, here's the definition of this term. And then there might be 2 or 3 sentences after that that give examples of the term, go into a little bit more detail, flesh it out a little bit, right? And some of that might be important enough to write down, but it might not be. You might move on to the next paragraph, and then the next paragraph has like new concept and a few examples to flesh it out and fill in a little bit more or whatever, right? So I'm not saying this is going to work every time, but pay particular attention to first sentences, second sentences of paragraphs, and just be aware of that structure, right? And it'll give you a sense of, like the kinds of things that I can test you on in a multiple choice test are probably not going to be that supporting material. The supporting material is important because it helps to make you understand the term and the definition. It gives you context. It might relate that definition to something you already know, right? So that it sticks better. It's not that that stuff isn't important. It's just that it's not the kind of thing usually that I would be able to test you on. In a multiple choice test like this, as you've seen, a lot of times what I'm testing on is basic concepts or terms and stuff like that. That's just kind of the nature of these types of tests. So let's say your second time through reading, you're going to zero in on those and you're going to make notes. You're going to write that stuff down. Right? Now, that means you might have 2 sets of notes. You might have 2 different notebooks. One set of notes from the lecture and one set of notes from the reading. And obviously a lot of it's going to be the same stuff. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but it might be presented in a different order, in a different way, and that's fine. Because one of the things about understanding some material is understanding it from different perspectives, not just one perspective. So the book will have one perspective, one way of presenting it. I might have a slightly different way. That's good. Okay, so here's what you do as you're developing these parallel sets of notes. Once in a while, sit down and make a third set of notes that combines the 2, right? And this might be a good thing to do, let's say, in the several days before a test. You could do a little bit of it as you go, continually throughout the unit, or you could use that activity as sort of like your test prep. Now, I think I said this in a previous lecture, but you should not go overboard studying the night before a test. You're studying, again, I hate that word studying, I really prefer learning, but your studying should be spread out pretty much evenly over the whole 2 or 3 weeks between each test. You should not kind of blow stuff off for a week or 2 and then try and cram for a week. Doesn't work. It has to be done gradually, right? So it might seem like a lot of work taking notes from the book, reading the book, combining 2 sets of notes, but remember, it's the work and the effort that gets the results. And if you spread it out, if you do it over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, it's not really that much work. It's a lot of work if you try and cram it all into 1 week. The day before a test should be like any other day, right? You are a full-time student, you're a full-time learner, Shouldn't do any more or any less. You should definitely not deprive yourself of sleep. You should get a full night's sleep the night before a test, because if you don't, all the work and all the studying you've done is going to be for nothing, because your brain just doesn't work as well on less sleep, right? You don't read as well, your synapses aren't firing, it just doesn't work. Don't do it. Right? Okay, what else can we say about notes? I think it's good to organize your notes in a hierarchical way, sort of like an outline. So in any subject, certainly music, but really in any subject, you have some things that are more broad or general, and then you have some things that are more specific, right? So make sort of like an outline. This is probably a good thing to do with your final set of notes. Say, okay, I'm going to take the material from these notes, from the lecture, these notes from the book, and I'm going to combine them and make an outline. And this outline is going to be organized according to big general concept, major heading, Roman numeral 1. A, subheading, Arabic number 1, 2, 3, 4. And these might be examples that back up letter A, which is part of Roman numeral 1, all right? Take the effort to organize the material and say, okay, what belongs in what category? What is more general and what is more specific? How does this fit into that? Right? All of that, again, decision-making about the material. How does this relate to that? It forces you to make connections, to engage with the material and try to understand it. And again, it might force you to ask, well, wait a minute, as you're organizing, I don't know where this particular piece of information belongs. Maybe I don't really understand it as much as I thought I did. Maybe I should send Dr. Kirkman an email or something and clarify, right? So it's all an integrated process where you're constantly evaluating whether or not you truly understand, right? And the process of engaging with, organizing, condensing, working with the material is what's going to get results, if anything will. Now, notice I didn't say just effort will get results. Not all effort is equal. It has to be results-oriented effort, So, for example, one thing that I will rail about, if I haven't already done so, is highlighters. I think highlighters are the worst thing in the world. Because what highlighters do is they give you the feeling of learning without any actual learning taking place. It's like one of these activities that looks like learning. Like, oh, I've spread some yellow ink over these words. I must understand them now. No. All you've done is ruin a book and waste some yellow ink. And you've given yourself the false feeling of understanding. Like, oh yes, highlighted means understood. No, it doesn't mean anything. It just means it's yellow now. Right? So I would probably not bother with highlighting. Also, I am not a big fan of index cards. Now, index cards can be useful as maybe a final step. So you take, a definition, a term on one side, definition on the other side, you shuffle them, whatever. The problem with index cards, relying on them too much, is it takes the sort of the big picture, this jigsaw puzzle that we're trying to put together over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. We're trying to organize the pieces, see how they fit together, so that in the end we have a big picture, right? But what index cards do is the opposite. We take this big picture and we blow it apart into little individual pieces that don't necessarily fit to each other. At least we're not connecting them to each other. The act of connecting, remember, is crucial to understanding. Connecting this fact to that fact to this fact, and also connecting all of these new facts or concepts or terms to stuff you already know, right? So try and connect things together. Find ways to connect things. Don't find ways to blow things apart and atomize things, right? I'm not saying that note cards, they're not as bad as highlighters. I'm not saying that they should never be used. I would definitely make a really good outline first. And then after that, if you have time after that to make note cards as well and quiz yourself with the note cards, that's fine. What I might do instead is, let's say I've made all my notes and I've organized my material, I've done everything. What else can I do? Maybe go in the book. Now, in the back of each one of these units in the book, there is a list of terms, right? Without the definitions, which is key. Because what you can do is just point to a term and see if you can define it yourself out loud from your head without looking at your notes. This is the key thing. At some point, maybe a few days before the test, you absolutely must wean yourself from the notes. Don't be so dependent on the notes. Right? This is always part of my process when I have a student come to me for extra help. Basically what I do is I ask them to tell me, basically to teach me about the material. I say, what can you tell me about the 3 different types of texture? And if they start reading it from their notes, I say, no, I'm not interested in your ability to read. Right? We already established your notes are good. I don't care if you can read it from your notes. I want you to tell me what it is from your head. And if you can't do it 2 or 3 days before a test, that's a problem. Right? Now, it's true that my multiple choice tests always have the correct answers there. At least one of them is a correct answer, and yeah. So you don't have to necessarily kind of come up with it out of your head. But if you can come up with it out of your head, I mean, that's a huge advantage. Then you're going to second guess yourself a lot less because you will know you have internalized, you have ownership of the right answer. So picking it out of a lineup is no problem, right? So you have to go above and beyond a little bit the standard of the multiple choice test. The multiple choice test is a compromise. It's obviously not ideal. I mean, I just do it because with 50 students in each section, and it would be crushing workload to do otherwise, right? So I use multiple choice tests. I think there are ways you can do them that really do test whether someone understands the material or not. They can be effective, but there are some problems with them too. So for example, life, the challenges you will face in life are nothing like a multiple choice test. You will have difficult situations at work someday or difficult problems. And you will not have like 4 answers magically appearing before you where you know that one of them is the right answer. It's just not the way it works, right? So multiple choice tests have their pros and cons. But you should not, again, you should overshoot the expectations of the multiple choice test. You should really try to learn the material. If you truly learn and master the material, the multiple choice test will be no problem at all, right? If you are just trying to pass the multiple choice test, that's too low of a bar, right? You have to learn the material. And if you learn the material, the multiple choice test will be a piece of cake, right? Let's see, what else about notes? Write carefully, write neatly, take the time to do it in a really legible way. This isn't usually a problem with the notes that I see, again, because I have students who are putting in the effort, at least to come and see me, who are clearly interested in doing well in the class. So usually their notes are quite neatly written and all that. But again, all that little extra effort makes a difference. I think that's about on the subject of notes. I think I've probably done as much as I can do in the amount of time that will be reasonable for me to upload on YouTube. It always takes a long time if it gets it up to, let's say, an hour or so. So I'm going to stop here. You might see more of these lectures on learning. And if you have a question like this student did, if there's some aspect of learning that you'd like me to talk about, I'm happy to do that. So send me your questions and I'll make more videos that are kind of optional, that aren't necessarily related directly to music, and I'm happy to do that. Okay? Good luck, and we'll see you next time. Next lecture will be going over the test. See ya.